Hey, everybody, it's Helen Hillocks, and I'm a licensed therapist, intuitive counselor, as you know, and this is From My Heart to Yours podcast. And today I have the really great honor of introducing Patti Montella, who is a transformational life coach who has written an amazing book called Becoming Unshakable. And she's going to tell you all about that book and why she wrote it. And I'm going to tell you just a little bit more about her to start with. She has been a pioneer, risk taker, and leader her entire life. She built a thriving corporate career on the cutting edge of travel technology before leaving it all behind to dedicate her life to uplifting society. And I love that, as a spiritual activist myself. I think that's another word for uplifting society. The skills she sharpened in the business world have served her well as an international speaker and inner transformational coach who's taught tens of thousands of people worldwide how to access more happiness, peace of mind, and dynamism in life, from CEOs and government leaders to royalty and college students over the past 25 years. Anyway, I'm not going to read anything more because I want to introduce you to Patti herself. Yay, Patti, welcome.
Oh, it's so good to be here with you today. Thank you.
Welcome. And please tell us how your book, I mean, if you want to say a little bit more about your own journey first, that would be great. Or if you want to just dive into Becoming Unshakable.
Well, let me just see what flows from this morning, and we'll go with it. Maybe a little more context, and we'll jump into it. So, yes, I was a 20-year corporate executive with a major airline and travel technology company, and I had a great life, no doubt about it. But I started getting migraine headaches also as a way of life. And what I came to realize is that was a manifestation of stress and grief and things like that, negative emotions that I really hadn't dealt with. I had just used the old adage, come on, buck up, keep going, you can do it.
Stay busy. It'll be fine.
Yeah, stay busy. Don't sit and be with yourself and self-reflect on your truth. And it wasn't fine. And after the death of a very dear friend during the AIDS epidemic in the early 90s and the death of my marriage, I decided to make a change in my life and move to Colorado, where the air is very fresh and the mountains are very big and the scenery itself is expansive. And 6 months after that, Helen, I came to meet a client who told me about this breathing course called the Happiness Course, which she had not taken herself. And I said, I've been getting this message for a couple years. I don't breathe enough. And I notice when I stop and I take long, slow, deep breaths, I can either minimize or mitigate those headaches, which were ruling my life at the time altogether. So I just showed up. And after the first breathing technique, the Sudarshan Kriya, which I talk about in my book, which was conceived by renowned spiritual leader Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, I did that breathing technique, and I talk about it in the chapter, one of the first chapters in the book, what a game changer it was in life. And that the hole in my heart, literally, I felt a hole in my heart from the death of my friend and what that was like at that time in history, and the death of the marriage and all the things that we all go through in life. I felt that heart filled up, and I realized after that breathing technique, it was filled with love, and that I was love, and that I didn't have to go looking for love. I had an infinite supply of love from within, and I said to myself, I want to know how to tap into that from now on, not only for myself, but to know how to share this with other people. And that's how my spiritual journey took a whole new direction.
I want to ask you before we go on, how do you envision breathing? I know this sounds like kind of a crazy question, but it's such an incredibly powerful experience to take deep, long, full, slow breaths. And it sounds so ridiculously simple.
Yeah.
Yet it is one of the most profound experiences in life. And I'd like to have you dive into that a little bit and talk about is it about breathing, reminding us that we're part of the oneness? Is it about breathing the chi in that is the source of all life on earth? I mean, all life in the whole universe. How do you envision the breath that is so profound that it changed your life?
That's great questions. So the very first act of life is we breathe in. And the very last act of life is we will breathe out. That'll be our final exhalation. And everything in between is life. So what we've learned through science is that every emotion has a corresponding rhythm of breath. So, you get excited, you inhale, you're excited. I used to be a big sigher. You knew I was annoyed if you heard a lot of heavy sighing, because are you a sigher too?
I don't think so, but I don't know. I'm sure I do. I'm sure I do. I mean, my husband sometimes says, okay, what's wrong?
That's it.
I'm not sure it's sighing, but there's something about my breathing that he noticed.
Yes, there's something about the breath. So when we exhale, we are removing the toxins. We're releasing the stress. So what happens in life is through different events, impressions, emotions, our breathing pattern can get off. It'll get off balance. And learning through the yogic sciences how to bring that rhythm back to body, mind, and spirit is the art of living. That is the most powerful impact on consciousness, is breath work combined with meditation. So if you've had a really difficult day, or you've just been pulled in so many directions, if you stop for just a moment, close your eyes and look at where your breath is, you might see that it's a little shaky. That means your consciousness has got a shakiness in it. You might be holding your breath. I used to hold my breath a lot. A lot of us do that. We don't even realize that we're holding our breath during whatever the situation is in order to move through it. But there are actually 7 layers to our existence, and the breath is the link between body, mind, and spirit. So it just makes sense, doesn't it, to learn how to make the breath smooth and fine and light, which is the direct impact on your nervous system, which allows the consciousness to be smooth and fine and light. And this, I've learned, is what allows us to increase our capacity to have the resilience to respond to a situation or a difficult person or a difficult environment with skill and grace and clarity and creativity, rather than reacting from a place of I don't like it or I don't want it, any kind of a short temper. We don't want the intellect to be clouded with emotion. And so learning to breathe in a rhythmic pattern to keep that consciousness like cool air conditioning, I have found to be the greatest skill in life.
I love that. And, one of my favorite topics, and I did a podcast on it months ago, was about reactivity.
Yeah.
And how damaging reactivity is to our lives. And I still do it sometimes. I still can get reactive, but the breathing is such a reminder. And I want to ask you, though, directly again, does it represent a reminder that you are connected to the oneness and therefore you can relax into higher consciousness? Is there an element of that reminding you of the oneness through your breath that fits into your concept, or is it more on the level of consciousness and that's how you discuss oneness?
Well, I no longer need to be reminded. in the beginning, I was doing this as a regular spiritual practice so that exactly what you said, I don't react, I respond. And I began to see my self-confidence go up, my sense of belongingness with others going up, because my heart was open and there was a good balance between head and heart. You know, in business, I needed my head. In relationship, I needed an open heart for that kind of communication. So now, through breathwork and meditation, which I do every day, twice a day, it has become my living reality, my experience, because that nervous system has been polished again and again and again. And the concepts and the cravings, the aversions, the habits and patterns that created this illusion in my mind that I was separate, it's gone now. And that's why I wrote a book about my experience. And I'm very honest in my book about what a knucklehead I was in so many different ways on the path, and what my mind and these concepts and judgments and this false sense of separation from the oneness that we are, what that did until I came out of the illusion and realized I am that. I am that. That's all that is. There is. And it's brought a dimension to my life that I never could have imagined. And so I wrote the book, and I'm speaking more and more now. Of course, I've been teaching this all over the world for a very, very long time. But it does seem like people are even more open than ever before when I started 25 years ago. And I'm eager to get that information into people's hands so that they can have more ease, more sense of belongingness with themselves and others, more love, because that's our nature. We want more. And to realize anything other than that is an illusion.
Do you see the other than that? Because again, I am so struck by even the terminology. That's why I was grinning so big. I worked with a spiritual teacher, I still do, named Beth Green. And, you know, the I am that is one of the tools. That exact phrase is one of the tools that we use to remind us that we're not separate. Even if I don't like your behavior, I am that. So I feel so excited to hear another teacher. Basically, I think of it as downloading information from the higher consciousness.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And can I speak to that
Yes,
for one
yes.
moment? So if I could go back to something I mentioned a few minutes ago, are the 7 layers of existence. There's the body, the breath, the mind, the intellect, the memory, the ego, and the self. And I used to hear this, I am that, we're all one. Really, it was a struggle for me in the beginning. It was an intellectual concept for me. And I also can say I felt separation because I couldn't understand it, since I was trying to connect with it at my intellect. But the highest level of existence is the self. So what I have found, and many others on this path have found, is when we use the breath to settle down the mind and emotions and become established in the self, which leads us into samadhi, meditation, that oneness, then it becomes an experience rather than an intellectual concept.
Right.
And that's the beauty of these spiritual practices, so that the knowledge of I am that thou art becomes your living truth, not something you're reading about, not even something you're telling yourself. It becomes your living truth. You become the embodiment of it because that veil is now gone and you're living your truth. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. You know, I can't speak for my listeners, but it definitely makes sense to me. And I think of it, the question I was going to ask you a minute ago was, do you identify the ego, and you were just mentioning that in the 7 layers, do you identify the ego as the aspect of us that energizes separation?
Yes. It can. You know, I always feel the ego gets a bad rap. As you know,
it has its function.
Absolutely, it has its function. But yes, the ego
over way too much. You know, it needs to be doing the job it was meant to do, which is remind me to brush my teeth and not run out in traffic.
Exactly. And if you have a big challenge, to tell yourself, I can do this, to pump yourself up. And then other than that, it's good to put it in your pocket. So yeah, it's the ego that feels that sense of separation. And you know, in the country now, we have such extraordinarily high rates of loneliness. It's almost an epidemic proportion. And it's just this false sense of separation. Our true nature is a sense of belonging with one another. That's why if you see a kid crying in the mall and you don't see a mom or dad around, your knee-jerk reaction is, that child belongs to me. Let me go find the parents. Let me bring that child to safety. Or if we're driving on the highway and we see an accident, our knee-jerk is a sense of compassion, right? That's just human nature. And so it is our nature to have that sense of belongingness with one another. That's why we like so much variety, different foods, different music, things for different cultures. And what I feel is that when the identity gets, you could almost say upside down, where we begin to get into this disease of I-ness, you know, I want my family, my religion, my culture. This is my gender. This is such a limited form of identification. The best form, the happiest form of identification, the most inclusive, is that we are one divinity, and then that we are human beings. And then those limited identifications come into play. But in society, when we have it upside down, that's where it leads to violence, broken relationships, loneliness, isolation, and the things that we're seeing happening more and more in the world today. It doesn't have to be that way. A little breath work, a little meditation as a regular practice, you come back to your nature and remember, oh, you belong to me and I belong to you. I may not agree with what you're doing or saying, but I don't have to lose my cool over it. I can respond skillfully.
Well, and I can find what connects us as opposed to energizing what distinguishes us from other. But our, you know, you were in your bio, you talk about you've been dedicating yourself to uplifting society. And that's what I think of as uplifting society, is reminding us that we are one, as opposed to our society right now is so based on dividing factions. And I agree with you, it doesn't have to be that way, but it's an uphill struggle, you know, depending on the trend of the politics. It's indefinitely an uphill struggle to remind us that we are one. And I'm thrilled that there are so many people like you, you know, who are advocating for that and saying all it takes is this shift. I mean, which is a big shift in that my well-being is really dependent on you thriving also.
Exactly. We're all in it together. And, you know, I used to be the national director of our youth programs, and we were starting to teach this in really rough schools 25 years ago. And it was beautiful just through the breath work and gang-infested areas. The kids would come back to us and say, ma'am, I wanted to knife my schoolmate, or I wanted to punch my schoolmate because of something that happened with a girl in high school or whatever it might be. But I remembered my breath. And in the moment, you know, your breath is always with you until it isn't. He stopped that young man. He took some deep, long breaths in with a particular technique we showed him that you can use on the spot. And the whole situation de-escalated. And he didn't kick hurt anybody. He wasn't hurt. The drama that can ensue just by becoming aware of the thing that gives you life is the breath. Same thing that happens when we teach in prisons. I teach veterans, and I've taught many people who come from extreme areas of conflict. We always begin with a particular rhythm of breath and realizing the value of breath and how to make it smooth and fine and light so that you can redirect that energy into creativity and connection.
I still, every time you say it, I still, for myself, think it reminds me that we're one. It reminds me that we're one because we're all breathing the same air.
Exactly.
We're all, it is our connection to the oneness that we are taking in. And again, it may be second nature to you, and it is second nature to me too, in a way. But the concept makes me think every time of that gang member was being reminded that we are one by taking the breath. And whatever we can do to remind us that we are one, whew, powerful.
Exactly. And, when true enlightenment is when you're at home wherever you are. And that is inner freedom, which is the subtitle on my book, The Journey to Inner Freedom. So inner freedom is not being bothered by anything in the outside world. Somebody thinks differently than you. Somebody looks differently than you. They say or do something you disagree with. Well, who's really being affected? Is it that person that you feel separation from, or is it you? If we stop and look at it, our mind, when we don't accept people and situations as they are, it's our mind that's getting affected. It's you that no longer has freedom or a smile. So I always say to my students, save your mind at all costs. Learn to shake hands with disturbance. That's how we can know peace. And honestly, Helen, don't you think if the only food we had to eat was a potato, it would be a boring world? If the only music we had was one particular kind of music, it would be a boring world. In fact, I always feel that if I had to stay at home with myself and that was the only person I had to connect with every day, I might want to run away. Our nature is we like variety.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
And I think about it in terms both on the macro and the micro level, and the micro level, the being at home and loving the diversity. I mean, I think of it in my own marriage that we have gone through hell in the 13 years we've been together because we got married later in life. I was 57, he was 60. And we have just been all over the place in terms of reactivity.
Because your habits are formed by then, right?
Exactly. But we forget that we are one and that I can't be thriving unless he's thriving. And, we've come through all of that. And now if he gets grumpy or whatever, instead of saying, what a jerk, I say, honey, what's happening? You're in pain of some kind.
Well, that's compassion. That's so beautiful.
Well, and that's what you're talking about too, is even with the gang member, it's really the breathing helped him eliminate the separation and the conflict and remind him at some visceral level that we are one.
Yeah, that he connected with the higher self. There's a story in my book. There's a couple of stories where I didn't feel that. And when the aha came, and one in particular was toward one of the last chapters. And it was someone who was really giving me a hard time for many years, just poking me. And I was always reacting to it. I was standing on the soapbox of what is just, what is right. And I was taking a position, but this person couldn't hear that. And I wasn't speaking ever up until that point of my aha, actually when my teacher, Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, scolded me and gave me a blessing all at the same time. So this person really went too far, and way too far, and was could have created some real damage for me. And I got the lesson that inside every culprit is a victim crying for help.
Mm-hmm.
And that the greatest forbearance in life is to accept that and to be okay with the ignorance, to forbear ignorance. So even though that person was acting out of ignorance, which is he didn't know better. He wasn't in the knowledge. He wasn't in the awareness of the self, but I was at that point. So it was up to me to realize that compassion is what needed to be applied, exactly what you're talking to the situation. And instead of trying to communicate head to head, which got neither of us anywhere, the skill was to learn how to be at peace with what was happening so that we could communicate heart to heart. It was such an aha moment for me to have compassion for the culprit instead of anger and my own self-righteousness, that everything settled down. We spoke. He realized his mistake, and then we all moved forward. The mistake was in the past. We move forward, and to this day, we have a much more pleasant, connection, a much more authentic connection. He still says and does things that I wish he wouldn't, and I'm sure I do the same. But there's a heart-to-heart connection, which means anytime you have that, then you have that sense of belongingness, and just like you are with your family or your husband or your wife, you'll say, well, that's the way they are. That is the way they are right now. They still belong to me. And if they do something that's really not going to be helpful for them, then I can speak up without judging, just because I love them, to help them to be aware of it. I find it helps me to sleep at night and keeps my heart happy by understanding this and allowing that compassion to rise. It's not a passive acceptance, it's an active acceptance.
I totally understand. And, it's interesting because I wouldn't even use the word culprit, because to me, that's a separating name. I would say,
perhaps, yeah.
I would say something like, if there's painful experience, if there's a painful behavior happening, then there's a painful source of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I totally get that idea. I just think even our little words can be separating. We don't even think about it.
Yeah.
But I love what you're saying. And again, the macro to the micro, that the macro is the world engagement. Wouldn't that be awesome, Patti, if our world leaders could do what you're talking about doing with that guy?
Absolutely. Years ago, when I went to the United Nations, I was a UN representative in Geneva, New York, when I first started out on this path and left my career. I was so excited because I'd always had that dream of being at the UN as a young girl. I really never knew that it would manifest, and here it was manifesting. And I was going to a lot of meetings, doing different things with different peace organizations and my organization. And honestly, I was stunned. I was stunned at how much disharmony there was amongst the people that wanted to bring forth peace. And I knew right there and then, if more of our government leaders, if more leaders of all types would stop, do some breath work and meditation, it'd be a much happier world. And so much creativity comes up through that. So much clarity of mind. That's where the innovative solutions come, from that silence. And it would be a very different world. So we've got to get that message out together as often and as much as we can.
It's a painful reminder of how prevalent ego is, even in organizations and people who want to do good work. but our whole society, our whole world is based on competition. And it's like, my foundation is competing with your foundation for the funds to be able to, teach this wonderful material. I mean, it's so sad.
Well, the best competition I find is with yourself. I used to be a skier.
Yes.
And I would look at people around me, and I always try to ski with people who skied better than me. And then when I did that, I'd learn from them, and I would up my own skiing, right? Do an upgrade. Same
Yes.
thing on the spiritual path. I would compete with myself. I've seen it as a video game. Okay, my button got pushed here. Now, the minute I was aware, I know that the minute you're aware, 75% of the habit is already dissolving.
Mm-hmm.
And so the best competition is with yourself, and also loving yourself, of course, as we know, at the same time, so that we can all live life to our highest human potential. And as you well know, we are spiritual beings having a human existence. And every day, I always say to my students, who are leaders in the world, and maybe a college student, is put the Teflon coat on before you start your day. Give yourself that competitive edge to be the best version of you, so that through breath work, meditation, and wisdom, when you come across these difficult times and difficult people in life, which is part of life, you won't lose your smile because of it. Maybe you'll be the one who will be able to disarm it and keep that sense of connection, that sense of oneness going. Give yourself that spiritual armor so that you can have the best experience in life. No need to struggle. It all begins with our own mind, our own consciousness. And if you're not taking responsibility for your own mind and consciousness, and you're giving people and situations that power, then you're going to lose your smile. You're going to be small in life. You're not going to experience all that life has to offer and what you were born here to do. And it seems to work.
Absolutely. It seems to work. When we are spiritually powerful, we can handle things so differently. My daughter is a recovering heroin addict. And when she was using, she's now over 2 years clean, gone back to college.
Congratulations. It's beautiful. That needs to be celebrated.
It is definitely celebrated every day. But when she was out there, every day I had to face the reality that she could be dead today. And it still makes me cry to even think about it, but I always knew that I would go on. I would be okay.
Because you have spiritual strength.
Exactly. And I've done the work to have that. I have a community of support. I'm willing to face the pain. So it's like I know what you're talking about, and I know that it's real and that it works, and that becoming unshakable is a reality that everyone can develop. Would you talk about some of your favorite things from your book? Some of your, there are so many chapters, the ultimate relationship, the wealth of faith, all kinds of assorted nuts, which I love. From jet set life to ashram life, TikTok, it's time. We could go through. I love all of just the titles of the chapters are wonderful little snippets to remember. So would you pick just some of your favorite things?
Well, I think the biggest is the wealth of faith, because this was a lesson that my teacher, my guru, had to really work to bring up within me. And at the end of my career, I think like a lot of people too in life, Helen, I wasn't trusting so much. Either I was doubting myself, or I was doubting society. I was doubting other people, and there was a little cynicism in me at that time. And through all these years, again and again and again, I have gotten the lesson and had the experience that we don't walk alone, that there is a divine power with us. We are not alone. And if any of us, recovering addict, CEO, struggling student, stop and think of times in our life where we really wondered, can I get through it? I can't get through it. How am I going to get through it? If we really stop and think, something shifted on the outside and something shifted within us on the inside, there was a helping hand. Whether it was somebody who came when you got a flat tire, or it was somebody who helped take you to the hospital, or it was someone who sat and had a cup of coffee with you, the divine was there, watching your life, guiding you, rooting for you, wanting the best for you. And throughout my spiritual journey, this has been my number one lesson. It was about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago now, I'm not sure. I went back to the Middle East. I've taught in the Middle East before. And as a woman traveling alone from the West in the Middle East, I wasn't sure what that was going to be like. I've traveled the world, and that was one place I hadn't been to before. I have to tell you, it was amazing to me, mind-blowing, all the support I was getting from people and that I never could have anticipated, situations that were unfolding to help me to share this knowledge, to do this work, and to make my life easier so that I could do it and I didn't have to worry about the mundane things. And it was at my culmination of my 60th birthday last year during an ancient Vedic ceremony with Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, and looking out at all the love I was surrounded by and recalling what I'd been through in my life, that again, it went from an intellectual concept to an absolute living truth that I've never been alone. It was just the I-ness, the meanness, the this is too hardness that would come up that gave the illusion that I was. But my truth is, there's always been a guiding hand. There's always been love. There's always been support, even if I couldn't see it at that time. So our true wealth in life, to me, is faith. You can I've taught a lot of very wealthy, financially wealthy people who are very poor in spirit and wanting to have the wealth of faith. With faith, you are unshakable, come what may. And that's always going to be my favorite story in the book, and the favorite story in my life is to really get that, to know that, to be that, and now to share that truth.
I love that, Patti. That is my favorite story too.
Oh, good.
Absolutely. I have a couple of examples of that when my daughter was in treatment, over 2 years ago, she shared this, and it's interesting because she doesn't remember it exactly the way she told it to me, but the treatment center took them to the beach or to the park or somewhere every day to show them that you can have a wonderful time in recovery. And one day she said she went into the ocean, and it makes me cry still. When she came out, she felt like God had lifted, we're not Christians, so it wasn't like a baptism kind of thing, but she went into the ocean, and when she came out, she felt like it was lifted from her, and she knew she could make it.
Thank you for telling me that, because that's it. And when I did the first Sudarshan Kriya through the Art of Living, and I had that experience of divinity. We are divine beings. We are truth. We are beauty. No matter what it looks like on the outside, no matter what you're doing or have done, we are made up of a substance of love. And it is so, when we can lift that veil, so anyone, beginning with ourselves, but doing it like for your daughter and others, when that aha comes and we remember that really is what we are, then life is going to change.
And you never know when that moment is going to happen.
And you never know when that moment's going to happen.
It could be a hello from a grocery clerk, and your eyes meet, and it sinks in at that moment. We are one. I mean,
I am divine. I am beautiful. I mean, we're all born really cute, little laughing babies full of unconditional love. It did not go anywhere. It's still there. So through the breath work and meditation, we can lift those impressions and that false talk that we've given ourselves or that we've heard. We can lift the negativity, the anxiety, the grief, the anger, the shame. It is not what we were born for. I find that through the breath work and meditation, it goes beyond that intellect to accessing that point of truth. Once you have it, you'll only go forward from there.
Yeah, I think that some babies, though, are born with a lot of pain because their parents are in a lot of pain. And it's like all of us get to heal. Again, it's that macro and the micro. We all absolutely have potential as babies to heal that and move forward. And yet, unless we all move forward, we're still going to pick up all that pain.
Well, that's the outer husk, the pain. Pain and pleasure they come from the same place. So even if the baby, I was a volunteer for years in children's hospitals, and I held the crack babies. And the core of everyone is divinity. The
Absolutely.
core of everyone is love. It's just letting go of that negativity to come back home to who you really are. And we weren't born to be angry, afraid, and unhappy. We're born to celebrate life, to embrace life, to uplift ourselves, uplift others, to be of service. And that's something I have found which is what you're talking about too, is being of service to others gets us out of the I, me, my feelings, I want. And you begin to broaden your perspective, broaden your vision, deepen your roots. And when we are in our true nature, which is being of service to others, we're going to be so much happier.
Absolutely. Because again, it's a reminder that we are one. And it's a reminder of our own worth, that we have so much to give. I'm so sorry that our time is coming to an end, but would you tell people, Patti, how to contact you, and again, tell them the name of the book and where they can get it? And listen up, people, because you will be so happy you connected with Patti.
Thank you. So the book is called Becoming Unshakable, Wisdom Learned on the Journey to Inner Freedom. And it's available on Amazon. And also you can go to my website, which is www.pattimontella.com. That's P-A-T-T-I, Montella, M-O-N-T-E-L-L-A.com. Follow me on Twitter. Everything is under Patti Montella. And I'd love to hear from people, because there are 15 key wisdom lessons that I learned in that book. And even if you don't do another thing after you finish reading it, I think it will create some aha moments of self-reflection and shift in your life. And I'd love to hear from everyone.
Thank you so much, Patti. And, I want to say again, becoming unshakable is the goal of our lives. Whether we know it or not, it is the goal of our lives, and it reflects all of our spiritual wisdom and all of our seeking to connect. Because if we can become unshakable, it means we've gotten that connection to the oneness, and we're living it.
We are strong, and we are clear, and we are joyful, and we are living life with that lasting smile, which is how it's meant to be lived. It's been a true joy to be with you today.
Well, I so appreciate you being here, Patti, and I really mean it. I wish you all the best, and I hope Becoming Unshakable becomes an international bestseller, because we all need it. We all need it. The world needs it. And it would be a revolution in the world if everyone would read that book. So thank you again for being with us.
Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
I am sending you all my love and thank you for all the wisdom you've given to our audience today.